Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today I will be discussing John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn as it relates to social media. Now, social media is a very broad topic and it would be a disservice to define it. However, I thought this would be sort of a helpful place to start the video and provide some context. So, Webster's dictionary defines social media as forms of electronic communication through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, and other content. The point I'd like to emphasize here is social media as sort of a form of communication, right? But how then does communication relate to Ode on a Grecian Urn, right? Firstly, we see that the poem is called Ode on a Grecian Urn. And in this sense, even the poem's talking about art, well, it's not just talking about art, it's talking to art, right? And it's very much apostrophizing the Grecian urn. It's actually engaging in direct communication with the urn. So then how does the speaker address the urn, right? In the first stanza, we see the speaker say, "Sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme," right? In this instance, the Sylvan historian being the urn and rhyme being poetry, we see the poem sort of addressing how it's unable to accurately, communicate what the urn already communicates. The flowery tales that the urn expresses are sweeter and exceed those of rhyme and poetry, right? And as a result, throughout the poem, we see the speaker address the urn through questions that are forever unanswered. What men or God are these? What maidens loth? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? The urn never offers an answer to any of these questions, and the only answer it actually does give at the end of the poem is incredibly unsatisfactory, right? But in this sense, we actually see the urn emerge through the silence of the answer, through this sort of constant juxtaposition of the dialogue that poetry communicates through. Since we know that poetry is unable to accurately communicate the urn, or accurately represent and address the urn, we see the urn arise in what poetry doesn't say, right? It arrives in the silence of the answer, and the other important thing to stress here then is, poetry sort of as the communication of dialogue. In the earlier quote, we see the speaker emphasize rhyme is our rhyme. In this sense, rhyme extends to every man. We sort of have poetry framed as a collective action, right? As a form of communication between people, right? Between, a collective. And to relate this then back to social media functions in very much the same way. Social media first and foremost is a form of communication between people, but it does so using these independently existing entities like posts and videos and sometimes pictures of words and all those sorts of things, right? But because social media uses these sort of independent entities which do not respond, as a way to communicate between people, right, we sort of have a lack of communication emerging, right? There seems to be this absence permeating communication between humans, right? The independent post and being this independent entity that is the post and being unable to engage in dialogue with humans, right, opens up an absence, right, inherent to all sort of conversations that social media facilitates. Now, but then what exactly is the Grecian urn and these social media posts communicating, right? First, it would seem it's an inability to achieve one's goal, when the speaker is addressing addressing the urn and sort of describing the images on it, he says, "Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss." Right? So here we have this image of this lover trying to kiss someone, but as emphasized by the repetition of the word never, the goal here is never, never able to be accomplished. Right? Now, typically when we think of kissing, we think of it as sort of the peak of romance, as the essence of love, as love coming to its completion. In this sense, it seems what the urn communicates is that love will be forever unfulfilled. And the speaker acknowledges this negativity, saying, "Yet do not grieve, she cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss, forever wilt thou love." Right? And at first it would seem sort of the recompense for all this, or what makes it all worthwhile, is that the urn is permanent and it appeals to permanency. But as I sort of previously mentioned at the beginning of the poem, the speaker isn't totally reliable, right? Because we're using poetry as a means of communicating, we sort of need to question what the poem lays out for us, right, when it's discussing the urn. And so when we really think then about why is it that permanence makes it all worthwhile? Well, what makes permanence worthwhile, right? Forever wilt thou love. In this sense, if love wasn't present, permanence would have no meaning. The fact that love has value is what makes forever meaningful. Right? Love is still important. It's not permanence that's important. All that's being done here is we are shifting, the speaker is shifting value from the end goal, right, to the process. Because the permanence of the urn will always be a process, right? That is what the love is, which is what makes forever worthwhile. And this is reinforced at the end of the poem when the urn seemingly gives an answer saying, "Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know." Now this quote fails to answer any of our questions and fails to complete any of the purposes inherent in those questions, right? Dialogue and poetry as a medium of communication is goal-oriented and impermanent like ourselves. Right? In this sense, this unsatisfying answer forces us to encounter that, right? And by doing so, it forces us to value the process. Right? The process of piping songs, the process of a burning forehead and a parching tongue. The failure to give us a satisfying answer, right, but always reminding us of our inability to achieve that satisfying answer, right, leads us to focus on the process. The answer then in this unsatisfying answer is the indeterminate state that forces us to acknowledge the value of process, right? That's what the Grecian urn is communicating. In this sense, it's not inherently wrong to try and engage with the urn through poetry. It's not inherently wrong to engage with indeterminate objects that focus on the process through communication that focuses on goals. Right? In this sort of same way, when we look at a social media post, what we see it as doing is elongating a moment. Right? It preserves a moment in time, whether that be a honeymoon or me sharing my food with some friends and anything like that. It's doing that through this independent entity. But in doing this, we sort of become integrated in the process, right? Humans are, as previously established, goal-achieving individuals, right, who inevitably must come to an end, right? So, but sort of by taking these moments in time, these moments of communication, and sort of suggesting and using them to communicate between people where we ourselves are integrated in that communication, in the independent object, we fail to ever encounter any of the questions or the unsatisfying answer that result. Right? We never learn to value the process when we fail to acknowledge that we are temporary. And when we fail to sort of like distinguish between these modes of communication that the poem does, right? The poem acknowledges that it cannot ever sort of express the urn accurately, right? But social media, by implicating us in the independent entity, in the posts, right, and acting as if it can preserve those moments, fails to acknowledge the difference, which, as a result, we can never learn to value the process. So yeah, that's all. I'm sorry this went a bit over, but thank you for watching.